Hi, everybody. My name is Minda Hartz, and I'm your host of Secure the Seat Live, your weekly show that talks about securing your seat at the table. It's not enough for you to get your seat and kick up your feet, but are you bringing other people along with you? That is what I hope you will do. Happy Monday. I hope you had a good weekend. Let us know how your weekend was in the chat. I am just coming back from a few days of a retreat, so I'm feeling refreshed. It was definitely needed, and I hope that you find time during this holiday season to find your space and to find your rest, because we cannot win if we're not right within, and that requires some rest. So I'm so excited that you're here, because you could be anywhere on the internet right now and you're here with us. I want to just thank everybody who's watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm excited for today's conversation with my friend, author, speaker, mother. She sits at a lot of different intersections, but you've heard of her. She's a New York Times bestselling author, Eve Rodsky. Her book, Fair Play. If you don't have it, make sure that you get it. And then her new book, Find Your Unicorn Space, comes out later this month. And so we're so excited to talk about how you can find your unicorn space. And we want to make sure that you pre-order, because success is not a solo sport. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring my friend up to the stage to join us. Hi, Eve.
Hi, Minda.
How are you?
Good, really good.
I'm happy that you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. You know, any space that you're in, I like to occupy as well.
Ditto. For those who may not know about your work, can you please tell us a little bit more about your work and who you are?
Yes. Well, Minda, you know, I didn't set out to be a gendered division of labor specialist, right? It wasn't on my third grade, what do you want to be when you grow up board. I think that probably had like astronaut or veterinarian or something. But about 10 years ago, speaking of rest, it's close to my blueberries breakdown anniversary, but I had a complete burnout breakdown over a text my husband Seth sent me that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And, you know, just the 30 seconds of where people could be, you know, even if you aren't in this, you may be a leader where your employees are feeling this way. But after my second son was born, Minda, you know, I had opted out of the traditional workforce. Now I say forced out, because any woman who's not in the traditional workforce has been forced out in some way. Mine was losing my direct reports and having to pump. My lactation space was a dark stairwell. I had started my own firm. I had a breast pump and a diaper bag in the passenger of my car in my seat. I had gifts for a newborn baby to return in the back of the seat. I was racing to get my son to a 7-minute toddler transition program, all while trying to keep everything afloat. And then my husband sends me a text that basically defines me as the fulfiller of his smoothie needs. And that sent me on a 10-year journey. It really changed the trajectory of my life to understand that I was just a living statistic, Minda. 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family fall on women. And regardless of whether we work outside the home, it doesn't change. 43% of women take a career detour after having kids. 75% of our pay gap is the discrimination against mothers, which affects women like Minda or anybody in any family structure, because if you are perceived that you want to be a mother, even if you're not one yet, that pay gap still affects you. We literally have industries like my industry, I'm a lawyer by trade, where we bleed for flexibility. We set partners on one track, and if you want flexibility to take care of your kids, to have any semblance of a normal life, we call you of counsel. We give you a secondary seat at the table. So these are all things that you and I talk about a lot, about securing the seat at the table, and also how women can be complicit in their own oppression. And so I think that's the big things I've been thinking about. But the last thing I want to say is, when I started to envision a world where women would free up all their time because childcare and housework was being done by men in equal portions to women, and I center the hetero cisgender here because that's where a lot of our norms come from. I started to ask women, well, what would you do with all this beautiful found time? And a lot of women could not answer the question. When I asked them, what makes you you, Minda, and how do you share it with the world? Even very powerful women I had one powerful CEO who looked at me and said, shopping. So I was like, well, you don't understand the question then. And that's what the second book is about. Find Your Unicorn Space is answering that question, which is the sequel to Fair Play. If and when you have free and beautiful space to think, dream, ideate, what do you do with that time and space?
Whew. Eve, I think that's a great question for each and every viewer to, whether you're watching us live or you're watching us on the replay, think about what you do with that time, because I think sometimes we don't even see that that is freedom. Like, one of the definitions of freedom is no longer feeling confined. So if we weren't confined, based off of some of the things that you said, what would we do with our time? And that's a great way to think about as we enter into this week. I love it. We're going to drop in the chat your new book so that people can get that in their carts ASAP. It's a great holiday gift and a read. So make sure that you get that. We'll put that in the chat. Well, first off, congratulations on Find Your Unicorn Space. I just want to say, like, why did you feel like this was the next book after Fair Play? Because Fair Play is still wildly successful. It's a great read for those who haven't. Make sure you just go ahead and get both if you don't. But I'm curious why you talked a little bit about it, but I'm just curious why now.
That's a great question. I think the pandemic is a really, really, really hard time for many of us. But what I think a silver lining can be is understanding and an existential return to ourselves. And, I laugh because this book is coming out as a new year, new you. But the way I look at it is, I don't want a new you. I want the old Minda. I just want you to have time to be Minda, right? I want you to have time to be more than your roles. And as women's milestones get bigger, what I found was that women often get smaller. And that's because the extrinsic milestones become so overwhelming that we do a couple things. We say to ourselves, okay, yes, I can be a parent, a partner, and or a professional, but God forbid I spend my time outside of those roles. It's still highly subversive for women to say, I want sustained attention for something I love. And I think that looking at the pandemic as a real reckoning to understand that these extrinsic milestones have never served us. And part of the book, there's a fun part that I asked hundreds and hundreds of people, what would you do on a desert island? Like, if you played Survivor with me, and but everything was there. Your kids were going to be fine. There's no trauma. Your relationship is great. You basically can pause your life for a year. What would you do on that desert island? I know what you wouldn't do. What I never heard was I would get, Botox. I would, make more money. I would drive an expensive car. I'd never heard that. What people were returning to were things that ultimately aligned with their value system. And I think that that's what this book is really asking people to do. I can't tell you what your unicorn space is, but I can help you find it. And I do want to say one more thing that I think was really important during the Fair Play journey, Minda, that felt important of a whole nother book. And that was that a lot of people, when I asked them about this time, this desert island time, often people were reverting to self-care practices, which is, I would take long walks on the beach, which is great, as long as it's not commodified wellness, as long as you don't feel like you have to buy anything for that self-care. Or they would say, I'd love to FaceTime every morning with a friend, or, cross-pollinate pineapples and mangoes and call it the mang apple. One person said that. But the idea that friendships are important, but that's baseline. Self-care is important, but that's the baseline. That's not, I'm giving myself permission to do something radical. What the radical acts are the active pursuits. The radical acts are saying, I'm claiming space for the permission to be unavailable from my roles. And that active pursuit, Minda, was a harder thing. And that's why I call it unicorn space, because women taking up space is a subversive thing. But in Utah, especially women of color, and we deserve, women as a whole, but especially women of color who are 85% breadwinners. So you're dealing with the parent partner professional in a way that people maybe with partners who don't necessarily have as much burnout. All of us, but especially women of color, which you talk about, we have to get right within. And part of getting right within is understanding that you deserve permission to be unavailable from your roles.
Whew, that part, we do deserve that, right? And we
Yeah.
often, many women who, went on to the next life, or, they never got a chance to experience that unicorn space. And I'm so glad that you're allowing us to figure out what that could be for us. And I know that unicorn, that can be a buzzword, but I'm curious in your definition, what is that unicorn space, and why is that important for women, for whom I know, again, you've talked a little bit about that space, but for you, what is the unicorn? Because you hear a lot of bros talking about the unicorns and all this different things.
Well, that was actually on purpose. This is the thing. So I think every word to describe this sustained attention for things we love, Minda, have been problematic. Hobby is extremely problematic. It sounds like it is the most unimportant thing that you could do in your world. Whereas this type of creativity, these active pursuits that make you, are actually linked to our mental health and longevity. They are the big rock, and then the sand should be everything else. So I found hobby really problematic. I found passion project really problematic because, again, it just sounded like a nice to have, not a must have. Vanity project. One article, a Forbes article, described a midlife crisis as a return to your things you love. I don't think that's a crisis, but I will say that even the word I would hear people say, well, you need the white space. But then I would talk to a lot of friends, again, of color, who said, well, a white space is actually a really triggering word for me because that's a place where I'm not allowed in. And as a Jew, I don't like any spaces where people are not allowed in. So even the word white space wasn't working for me. So the idea of a unicorn space felt really a better terminology to rename what I'm talking about, because like the mythical equine, it doesn't freaking exist. It doesn't exist until you claim it. But if you do claim it, it can be that beautiful and magical. And the thing that makes it a unicorn, and this reminds me of this beautiful woman named Kat Medina. I found her again through interviews. She was a Sam's Club cashier. Her husband's a auto mechanic, and one night he heard her reading to her kids, and he said, "Oh my God, you have the most beautiful narrative voice. Like, you should record audiobooks." And so she ended up at Sam's Club. There was a microphone on clearance one day, so she just said, I'm going to buy this microphone. She uploaded herself narrating a book on her husband's, borrowed his laptop, and she's a full-time book narrator now. And not everybody's unicorn space will become their job. I will tell you that. But what's so beautiful about her story was that after one of the first times she narrated a book, Minda, she got a tattoo on her arm that said, "Reading books is like breathing air." And her mother was like, "Wait, hold your horses. You've read one book. How do you know you're even going to be successful at this?" But she said something really beautiful to me, which is that no matter what happened in the future, the radical act of her reading those one or two books could never be taken away from her. And I think this idea of things that can never be taken away from us, no matter what happens, Minda, your books are out there in the world. They are there. You did that, and you're about to do that a third time, which I'm very, very excited for. But they can't be taken away from you. And it doesn't mean our lives are perfect. The storms are still going to rain on us, but that idea of dancing in the rain, the antidote is these things that can't be taken away from us, these flow state experiences that are not always easy. But again, they become radical acts in and of themselves.
I love that so much, Eve. Thank you for telling that story, because I think sometimes many of us, we've been conditioned to think that we can't even find that space, or we're too old to do it, or this, that, and the other. And you said something really profound. We can get to that if we claim it, right? And I hope that people will think about what that looks like to go and grab it by the reins. I know that there's probably people in the audience watching across platforms. They're wondering, Eve, tell us, how do we get there? What's the process of creating? I know we're going to drop the link to the book. We don't want to give, you said Sam's Club, so we're only going to give a Sam's Club sample. Give them just a little bit.
I love that. But that's important.
Yeah.
It's important to think about, what are these first steps? And as you said, Minda, the first step is this idea of claiming it. That the permission to be unavailable or to live within our external extrinsic milestones have been given to us by others. And the permission to say I can be unavailable for my roles is, as we said, a very radical act in and of itself. And I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that it's not easy. It's not easy in a system where, and look, Minda and I, we write to the individual. We both recognize the context for which we're writing, right? We're never saying that we're blaming you for having these things on you. We're just giving you things to think about and say, we are breathing polluted air. The systems around us are not set up for our success, but you still have to breathe in that polluted air. You still have to exist. And so the idea that we are fighting for you in all the systems that will hopefully make your lives better, whether it be paid leave, whether it be universal childcare, whether it be more women of color in C-suites, but it is important to recognize that you still have agency in your own life. And so the way we start, and I'll use Minda as an example, if that's okay. You have the three things, or I will say that you do, that make up the prescriptive side of unicorn space. So like Fair Play, there's a beginning section that's gender justice, and then there's an actual program for reclaiming your unicorn space that applies to all family structures, to anybody. And I tell many stories that aren't just hetero cisgender women, but the three through line for thousands of interviews were curiosity, connection, and completion. So the book gives a program that explores all three. But speaking of Minda's life, I'll put words in your mouth. You had a curiosity, right? You said things are not the way they're supposed to be. What the hell? The stories you tell in the memo and right within, right? You this is not okay. So you're like, what is happening? You're seeing something around. You're curious, saying, is this really happening to other people? This is just doesn't seem to, I feel like I'm being gaslit, right? There's some curiosity. And then you connected with others to get their interviews, to get their data. And then you started to share that with the world. And then you did the hardest thing. The hardest thing I would say of all three C's is completion. The idea that you felt there was a time where the memo was ready to go into the world. And I know as a fellow author that we often feel like we can continue to edit, till we're blue in the face. But sometimes if you wait too long, you miss your moment. And I will argue the memo was exactly the right moment for what people needed to hear. And so this book is about that journey through curiosity, connection, and completion. I will say curiosity is the easiest place to start. It's a lot less triggering than passion. We all have them, but it's a return to our values. So I call it values-based curiosity because, as my friend said, she said she's curious about scrolling her friend's Venmo transactions. That's not the curiosity I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's not I don't know that that'll find us our unicorn space, but but I love that those three C's, which I think makes it obtainable. I think sometimes people see yourself, Fair Play, they see the memo and they think, wow, they've carved these lanes, but like you said, it started with that curiosity. It started with, our own pain points, right? And saying, let me explore this a little bit more. And so I hope that people will give themselves permission to figure out what your unicorn space is and what does your time and what does that value mean to you. The last question I want to ask, Eve, is I know that maybe there's some women and even men who are listening today or they will listen this week and they might have one time thought they found their unicorn space, right? And maybe life has happened, the pandemic has happened. How can people reignite to latch back onto their purpose or find their purpose?
Well, I think that's such a great question because I think at first the intention first, it's setting the intention. And that's why I think this is a perfect time as we go into a strange 2022 where people say, what? I think it feels like it's 2019 still. We've been in this time warp. I think the intention to understand something is really important. There's a lot of data now that shows if you say I'm going to spend 2022, pursuing happiness, you're actually going to be more sad. So the way to get return is to start using feelings like happiness in their right place. So the idea of a pursuit of happiness, whether it's in our Constitution or whatever, that is not what makes us happy. What makes us happy is listening to our feelings as clues. So it's about just spending a couple of times, a little bit of quiet, starting to pay attention. That's all I'm asking. Pay attention to when you're happy. Pay attention to when you feel, oh my God, that hour passed, right? Which is called the flow state. And I didn't even realize that we've been together for an hour. Sometimes talking to Minda when we were first met, it felt that way. Okay, well, why is it that when I'm with Minda, I'm really happy? The other feeling to think about is jealousy. The other feeling to look out for is resentment. Once you start to think and be able to live in your feelings, they act as clues. And what the clues are looking for is ultimately the intersection of meaning and happiness. So we know that you can have a happy life without meaning. That's called hedonic well-being. That's living on an island with a Corona and staying there for too long. That's or binge watching Netflix, for years. That's a hedonic pursuit. Doesn't do it for mental health and longevity. You can have meaning without happiness. That's called parenting. I will say I feel it all the time, Minda, but I do not feel happy when I'm parenting my kids. I do feel that meaning. But that intersection of meaning and happiness is that sweet spot that is linked to our longevity. So what I will urge you is that reading a book, great, but starting to write your book, that's what I'm talking about. Listening to a podcast, great, get curious, but ultimately, I mean, start your own podcast. You have a yoga practice, great. Take that class, train to be a teacher. The leveling up, those active pursuits where you have the intersection of meaning and happiness is what I'm talking about. And that requires paying attention to those clues. That's where I would ask people to start.
I love that so much, the intersection of meaning and happiness. And I think you gave us some really tangible ways to kind of think about that. And, I hope that as you all are thinking, we only have a couple weeks left of this year, and giving yourself that permission to find that space, find your unicorn space, I think is so important in your meaning and happiness. We're going to drop the link to Eve's book that comes out on the 28th. Make sure that you get it, because we want to make sure that you're feeling free, that you're in your space, you're in your zone, that you find your purpose. Eve, before we close out today's show, I know that people are on all the platforms like saying yes, they're loving what you said about parenting. You don't always feel happy. It's meaningful. One of the things about this show is I always ask my guests bonus questions. I am a lover. My grandmother's from New Orleans, so I grew up eating a lot of grits, and I love music and rap lyrics, which I sprinkle through all of my books. Curious, Eve, what is your favorite rap lyric and why?
Oh my God, I love it so much. Well, first, I have to just mention the fact that my honors thesis in college was a 500-page thesis following 3 young white men, and it was called "If You've Never Been to the Ghetto," based on the Naughty by Nature song. And it was the white appropriation of hip hop culture. And so I would say that lyric is important because I think the research that I did actually in the 90s is still as important today to understand how we interact with and appropriate and use different people's culture. So anyway, that's important. But I will say I love Illmatic. Nas, I've had a huge crush on him my entire life. He's shorter. I got to meet him. He's shorter in person than I wanted. But I'd say analyze me, surprise me. You can't magnetize me. Because what I remember saying that always when I was younger was I think it was important as women to say, surprise me, right? Especially when you're looking to date someone or to be in their company. Surprise me. You can analyze me, but surprise me, but you can't magnetize me, meaning don't. And I'd say today, what that means for me is like, I'm not buying your bullshit, right? You can't magnetize me with the extra bonus or the free lunch. I want to know that you are a company, if I was going to work for you, leaders that actually care about the values that I care about. So my shout out to Illmatic, which to me still is the best debut album of all time in all of hip hop. But that's
I
just me.
love that, Eve. I always learn something new about you every time. And Illmatic is a really, really classic album. And I love that you said that. I think as we're thinking about what jobs we have, what spaces we occupy, yeah, we're going to need more than Cheez-Its and foosball
That's
to get
right.
us.
Analyze me, surprise me, but you can't magnetize me. Not with any of that crap.
No, no, no. I love that so much. That's the energy we want here today.
Yeah.
And the last question is, all of people watching are leaders. We don't need somebody to give us a promotion or permission to be a leader. We can activate that today. What is one thing that you would tell everybody that they should consider on how to make the workplace better than they found it?
I'm going to have to say my call to action is always fair play, fair pay, and fair day. And that is look at whether or not you allow and you are looking at your workers as a 15 hours in a chair worker, or you really celebrate them in their full human experience as caregivers. That's fair play. Fair day is, do I have to raise my hand to take a piss, or do you trust me to get my work done? And fair pay is exactly what we started with, Minda, which is a recognition that the pay gap against women is really a bias against caregiving, against mothers, or at least 75% of it is. And so recognizing, do you have that bias? When people ask for flexibility, do they all automatically get thrown off a track to the C-suite? Because that's going to change who's up there if we fair play, fair pay, and fair day.
All the things. I love it so much. Eve, I'm just so proud of you. I appreciate you as a leader, as a friend. You've been a great success partner to me and in real life, right? This isn't just, we don't have a relationship just on the internet. And I appreciate you so much for how you show up and how you use your voice. So many people are beneficiaries of your courage. And I just want to say thank you for how you show up. We're going to put your links in the chat again so that people can go and make sure that you get both books. Fair Play, if you don't have it. I know one woman, when she found out you were going to be on the show, she's like, I just finished Fair Play this weekend. And so go ahead and make sure that you get the next book, Find Your Unicorn Space. Any last thoughts, Eve, before we let people go on with their day?
Yeah, I would just say, really think about your values. Think about the ones that are, lighting you up right now, but ones that you can also discard. For me, I'm taking with me into 2022 community and justice. Those are really important ones. They always have been, but especially in this year. And you know what? I'm leaving behind obligation, Minda. That's a very Jewish value. And it's been one that's been there with me a long time, obligation. But I think I'm going to leave that behind in 2022 because I don't feel obliged to wipe asses and do dishes anymore. And I'm gonna set that intention for the values that I want to inform my curiosity. So I'll ask you, you don't need a resolution. New year, same you. We like you, but really thinking about that you want to be and bring forward this year, and make that space to think about the values that you want to showcase.
Yes, let's do that. We like who you are. We want you to have space to be an even better version of the person that you want to be for yourself and in your future. And make sure that you find that space. Consider this week what that could be like. Think about your motivations. Think about your happiness. Go into the new year. You made me think of something, Eva. I'm leaving expectation in 2021 because trying to live up to people's expectation will get you nowhere fast. And so I'm leaving it all behind.
But I will say that for you, I can see, 2022 will be a big, I'll call it the slay it forward year for you. I call it slay it forward instead of pay it forward because you were slaying it forward. And I think what your young adult book is doing is forging that path behind you. So that's beautiful. And thank you for doing that for the generations that are coming.
Yes, thank you so much. Listen, everyone, we are so happy that you joined us. Make sure that you, after the show, you can catch the replay on YouTube. Share it with someone. I know that there's somebody who you know today who needs to hear this and needs to get Eve's book. So make sure that you share. We share the sauce here. We don't hoard it for ourselves. And then next week is our last show of the year. We're gonna have our holiday party. So make sure that you show up. We're gonna do some fun things next week. So thank you, Eve, for everything. Happy holidays, everybody, and have a great. All right, keep secure.
Bye. Bye.